Pasternak, and I'm the president and artistic director of Creative Time. For 35 years, Creative Time has been commissioning artists to create new public artworks that bring audiences to new places that they haven't necessarily explored before. 12 years ago, I had the pleasure of coming out to Governor's Island for my first time. And I thought, as I looked around at its rolling hills and its 17th century fortresses and Victorian homes, you know what? This is a great place for artists to come and interpret and create new work. We've worked with 19 different artists and artist collectives on the island and 19 different sites. And a project of this scope and nature really can't happen without the collaboration and cooperation of many. In particular, we want to thank the Governor's Island Preservation and Education Corporation, the National Park Service, and the offices of Mayor Michael Bloomberg. In addition, we want to thank our donors who, despite an economic recession, decided to pitch in and help us in this timely effort. In particular, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, Bloomberg, Warburg, Pincus, and the Lily Auchincloss Foundation.
Hi, I'm Leslie Koch, and I'm the president of the Governor's Island Preservation and Education Corporation. Governor's Island is truly a magical place. I consider myself very lucky that I work out here. It's a place where you experience your senses in a very different way than you certainly do in other parts of the city. What's happened with all of the art on the island is that you're experiencing both the island itself and also the spaces where the art is displayed as really kind of new experiences. And so it's not like going to a museum show. You can't look at a picture of it and understand it. It's really part of a journey to the island that starts when you get on the boat, and I think really gives New York a new and very different experience of art than we've ever had before.
In the first instance, these times suggest that rather than looking to the spectacular in art, I think we've experienced the last 10 years have been very much about these large-scale interventions, large-scale sculptural works. And it seemed interesting to me to consider an alternative form of public art that used very slight materials or ephemeral means. I was very interested in what came after the spectacular. My name's Mark Beasley. I am the curator at Creative Time. This project is Plot 09, This World and Nearer Ones, and it's the first public sculptural quadrennial for Creative Time. And many years ago I'd read about the Impressionists using dark mirrors. So as they were painting and to refresh their eyes again to colour, they would look into dark mirrors and then turn again back to the world to see colour again. So I was very much interested in works that had this sense of a kind of looking away from the centre, looking to some other site or situation, and then presenting what it's found back to the world.
Manic activity, the trees so full of life, birds, insects, or perhaps resting beneath the shade of a tree.
The initial invitation was made to Patti Smith to produce an alternative acoustic guide for the island, and my interest in particular was reconsidering the didactic material or the way histories are presented to allow somebody else a more poetic voice into that process. Patti invited her daughter Jessie Smith, a pianist, to produce a sound score. Patti would then write a series of lyrics of poetic form in response to the island's history. The work itself is experienced through headphones that can be collected from the information centre, the centre that you're in now. The piece itself is to be played not so much as a guide. It's not something that you wander around from building to building or room to room with. It's very much an ambient approach that the song or composition itself can be turned on or turned off as the visitor deems fit. It's very much this other voice that walks alongside you as you're experiencing the island.
Birds, insects, bright.
Teresa Margolles' work, cited in the picnic area of Nolan Park, is a simple cinder block wall relocated from the artist's home city of Culiacan in Mexico. The wall's pockmarked with bullet holes and bears specks of what seem to be dried blood. They're the results of a deadly shooting linked to organised crime. Culiacan is also known as Narco City and has an active underground economy based upon the trafficking of illicit drugs. What Margolles wants us to consider is not the wall itself, but the absent figure of the victim of the drug crime. Her citing of the work in Nolan Park essentially overlays one leisure situation, the situation of a picnic area, with one of the other leisure activities of New York, the cocaine industry. The wall's scarred surface reflects the histories of violence in two countries and the wall that essentially runs between them. Judy Werthein's film La Tierra de los Libres is presented in one of the colonial buildings. Essentially, it takes the form of two projections onto one screen. Judy Werthein collaborated with itinerant musicians, refugees from the Pacific coast of Colombia, on a remix of the US national anthem. The refugees came from generations of agricultural workers that were forced from their hometowns by conflict from the drug trade, and it drove them to inland cities. In order to make a living, they drew upon their cultural tradition of singing. The artist approached one such group to collaborate with her on this one-off performance. She gave the musicians a Spanish transliteration of the Star-Spangled Banner and asked them to reinterpret the words to craft an original song. As you can see from the film, the original hopeful statement of nation becomes a Latin requiem, made somber through their particular recourse to certain phrases, such as the glare of red rockets, or does the flag still wave over the land of the free? What was once a national anthem now becomes a series of questions. So the work Between You and I suggests this very broad, very absent space that's loaded between individuals. Two light sources or projections from the ceiling literally beam down into the space, suggest this ethereal or godlike presence in the room. But I think for Anthony the key moment is the moment between these two forms, these two light sources, and how they do or don't engage. His suggestion is that we only know ourselves through our connection to others. We only become one through the understanding of self, through a projection or through somebody else. Anthony's suggestion is that that understanding of the connection is one that really lies in the individual in relation to the object or his work.
It was almost as if the island was moving into itself.
Adam Chodzko's film Echo is cited in the basement of the Officers Club, or the South Battery building. Echo suggests a future narrative based upon a game invented by the children of the island, who call themselves the Military Brats. The game involved competitive attempts by the children of the island to be the apparent loser in a deal. So a prize record collection would be swapped for a leaf, or a car would be swapped for a joke. And I think the title Echo is an echo itself of the history of the island and the exchange of the island in two instances. So the initial purchase of the island for 2 axe heads, a string of beads and a handful of nails, and then the subsequent sale in 2003 of the island by the federal government to the people in New York State for just $1. But I think more importantly, Adam invests in fictional narratives to suggest other futures, other histories, or other connections between communities.
You end up in this parallel space.
Klaus Weber's large dark wind chime, or Tritone Westy, is situated at the bottom of Fort J parade grounds opposite the South Battery and near St Cornelius Church, and it consists of a large dark wind chime. Whereas normal wind chimes evoke a melodic, almost new age, spiritually upbeat sound, Klaus Weber's large dark wind chime is tuned to the Devil's Interval, or the tritone. Historically, the tritone, established in the 18th century, was thought to summon the devil or to summon evil spirits, and suggests in part Klaus's understanding, albeit mock, of the spirit of the age. Bruce High Quality Foundation's Isle of the Dead is screening at the theatre on the island. Isle of the Dead tells the story of a decimated art world coming back to life in zombie form. The foundation describe it as the art world has died, literalizing its economic death, and risen from the dead in search of an alternative space. And that alternative space is Governor's Island. I think for the Bruces, they very much occupy this history of the do-it-yourself kind of punk cultural aesthetic mixed with subcultural or countercultural values. So I think with the film, obviously it's got a very kind of amateur aesthetic. It's not this kind of overburdened special effects moment. Through this film, the suggestion is that alternative culture has to reconsider or reinvest the means by which it presents itself. So I think for them and their practice, it's about creating a situation where you can still produce, where you can be amateur, where you don't have to have budgets, but you can still have a voice within the arts. Greenfort is a Danish artist, and his work for This World and Near Ones is titled Project for the New American Century. Project for the New American Century is situated in what was called the Brick Village. All of these buildings will be eventually removed, but for a short time the audience is allowed, through the work of 2A, to actually wander down a corridor that's been set up by the artist into a playground at the heart of the Brick Village. And so 2A has taken the ruins of the barracks and basically gone into the buildings, pulled out different materials from doors to shelving units, and created this sign, Project for the New American Century, that you can see on the gable end of one of the buildings. 2A's interests or concerns with the sites, or things that he wants us to consider, are being presented as a series of signs that you experience as you walk down towards a brick village. Different signs point out the different buildings and where he pulled material out to construct the sign he built as his work. In a very simple way, 2A's cut into the buildings to create this signage that points us back to the history of the brick village. Susan Philipsz' work by my side is sited out on Lima Pier at the southern tip of the island. As an audience, you experience the work as you're walking around the southern tip and looking out towards the Statue of Liberty. The song itself that she's singing is from the musical Godspell. Susan describes the choice as her desire to sing a devotional song, a song of love and adoration that addresses the statue directly. The suggestion being that Liberty perhaps herself has disappeared in recent years. The song itself that asks the questions, where are you going? Where are you going? Can you take me with you? Is her kind of siren song to liberty itself, to kind of reclaim the idea of liberty. On the northern tip of the island, you'll find Niels Norman's protest camp. Niels Norman's project seems to be a symbol that suggests the notion of protest, how you can create a free space as an artist and the ability to create your own world. His suggestion is that there should be this free space for experimentation, for somebody to work out their relationship with the world, free from a governing order or free from the voices that choose to control the way we inhabit cities or urban environments. I think it's about the artist as somebody that is allowed for a short time or a longer period to play amongst the ruins of cultural history. And I think Niels is asking us to consider what is it that makes up our urban experience. I think part of the expanding story of the island is to add new narratives to its history, new suggestions of possibility, or new myths for the island. And in the work of Guido van der Werf, we're presented with new worlds or new ways of thinking, or this idea of romantic escape, of leaving your everyday, either shooting in a rocket out above the stars, or floating down a canal, listening to a favourite piece of music. And I was very keen to involve or include Guido's works because they suggest this escape or a flight of imagination, and that perhaps change begins with possibility, and the imagination is perhaps the birthplace of the possible. Edgar Arceneaux's sound cannon double projection is sited in building 404 on Admiral's Row. And essentially, as you enter into the building, it's not immediately apparent what the work itself is. The building is essentially empty. As you wander through the rooms, perhaps you're looking to see where the work itself is. The work consists of 2 infrasound cannons that send sound waves throughout the building. Registered between 18 Hz and 20 Hz, a very low audio frequency, these are sound waves that have different effects upon the body and create an experience of a feeling of being watched, or even the chills. In a sense, what Edgar's created is the idea of a ghost house, this empty house, but with the sense of somebody else being there, something else being in the space. Teresa in Quinto roughly translates as 3 of 5. They're an artist's collaborative practice based in Mexico. They proposed throwing a rock through one of the windows on the northern part of the island. They were very interested in overplaying this one very simple action. They were kind of interested in making this heroic or archival act, and through a series of watercolour sketches, a slow motion film of the action and descriptions of the action itself, they create this kind of narrative about the moment after the fact. And I think this was their reflection of the fact that once art moves out of a situation, life resumes its normal pattern. For Teresa, this was a point that they needed to make, that you have this very temporary, momentary window in which to operate. A number of the projects of This World and Near Ones consider the notion of the afterlife. Is it something that people are skeptical of, or is it something that people believe? A. Bronson and Peter Hobbs' Invocation of Queer Spirits was a closed ritual held on the island just before the exhibition opened. And basically a select number of people, in this instance no more than 7 people, were invited to take part in a 4-hour ritual. During the 4 hours of the ritual, specific histories of individual figures deemed of importance in the queer movement are read aloud or invoked. The project mixes those very real spoken histories alongside this idea of the unseen, of spirit life. And in many ways, this is the most ephemeral work of all the 19 works on the island. It's a work that essentially deals perhaps with the only community, if one were to believe in it, that still exists on the island. The community of the dead, of spirits.
Sometimes when I'm laying in bed, just out of nowhere, I'll just be laying in bed for a while, like half asleep or whatever, and just out of nowhere, I'll feel a bomb blast, hit me.
In Krzysztof Wodiczko's Veteran Flames, a naked flame moves to the breath or spoken accounts by Iraqi and Afghanistan war veterans of their experience both in combat, but also their experience upon returning home. Wodiczko is an artist that for many years has tackled the idea of the monument, and in a way his is the quiet whispered voice in the shadow of the monument. Throughout 2009, Krzysztof has been meeting with and exchanging stories with returning veterans. Voices were recorded in a recording studio, and then these recorded voices were played back through a speaker system in front of a naked flame. And so this affects the flame and how it moves. So in a sense, giving this feeling that it's the flame itself that's talking. So what we can see in Fort J is a projected image of the flame on the walls of the magazine building. And then through speaker systems, we hear the recounted tales. And I think for Krzysztof, part of the process is educating us, but also allowing these voices to be heard.
And they brought them back to our fire base for medical help because the guy wasn't dead and he was just wounded. And so they brought him back to the fire.
Mark Wallinger is an artist based in Britain, and his work for This World and Nearer Ones is situated on the ferry that runs between Manhattan and Governor's Island. The work takes the form of 4 signs placed front and back of the ferry, 2 on either side. They read sheep and goats. Wallinger's work asks us to reconsider the binaries of good, bad, right, wrong, us and them. 2 signs that simply read sheep and goats suggest 2 paths that we can take. A reference to the Gospel of Matthew and the suggestion of those who are to be saved, the sheep, who will sit on the left-hand side of God, and those who won't be saved, the sinners, the goat, who sit to the right-hand side of God. The work asks us to consider how words are used to frame us as individuals as either good or bad, right or wrong. So in the case of Lawrence Weiner, who talks about his use of text as material, Lawrence Weiner asks us to consider the weight or impact of words. As you use the ferry to move backwards and forwards from the island, the work becomes apparent, mainly as you return to Manhattan, As you stare at Lower Manhattan from the ferry, you'll see the text written in red 8-foot letters on the fender racks, and it reads, "At the same moment." I think his suggestion is a parallel between communities, between environments, and as we move around the city, or as we move between boroughs, as we move between states or even nations, that there are these shared similarities. Lawrence is very clear that the way that the work is understood is very much up to the individual. And so in that sense, it's an open frame, very directed by Lawrence, but of course the ultimate experience, or what is kept by the visitor or the audience, is their own individual concern. Tris van Michel is a British artist currently based in Berlin. His work for This World and Near Ones takes the form of a 2-day marathon lecture. Tris's practice operates somewhere between the storyteller, performer, and lecturer. Many of his works involve reinterpretations of different histories, of fusing different political situations. He draws upon the narrative elements and facts of a situation. In this instance, focusing specifically upon a photograph from 1977 of Manhattan. As many artists choose to create objects and place objects in the world, Tris van Michel very consciously chooses not to. For Tris, the artwork happens in the moment of encounter, in that social space and engagement between two individuals, between a tale told and a tale understood. The work lives and exists in the minds of the listeners.